We all know the New York Islanders need to free up cap space. In fact, right now they can't even field a 23-man roster. We're going to talk about some original ideas that may help them do that. Plus, we're going to remember what may be the strangest game in New York Islanders history. All that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
You're Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, just match with Indeed. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. We have got a lot to discuss on today's show. But first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You can also follow the show on X at Locked On Isles, and you can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR vs NYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long during the offseason. That includes hirings, firings, trade rumors, free agency, the draft. Hey, we have a signing today to talk about. We'll get to that a little bit later on in the show. It's always great to talk a little Islanders hockey with you, game time or anytime. So we all know the Islanders need to free up cap space. There is no surprise there. As of right now, the Islanders only have, they don't have a full roster. And typically an NHL team has a 23-man roster. And, the Islanders don't have that as of right now. They have 21 players on the roster officially. They have a projected cap space, according to Puckpedia.com, of $900,000. And they still have two restricted free agents out there. Oliver Wahlstrom, who has already applied for and will get a hearing in arbitration, and Simon Holmstrom. Well, guess what? The Islanders only have enough room to sign one of them unless they free up some cap space. Keep in mind that Lou Lamoriello, throughout his tenure with the Islanders, has never fielded an incomplete roster during that time, and is unlikely to do so. So clearly, right now, this team needs to find a way to add some cap space. And, we've talked about, okay, are they going to try to trade J.G. Pageau? That was always a possibility. Anders Lee, if someone would take the salary, has been discussed as a possibility. Some people have even talked about Casey Cizikas, although I don't think Zeke frees up enough cap space. His cap hit right now is only $2.5 million. Yeah, that would allow you to sign, let's say, Holmstrom and one other, minimum salaried player, or maybe, spend another $1 million, let's say, on another player, but that's it. It would not give you any flexibility. And also keep in mind that if the Islanders do not figure out a way to free up cap space when injuries hit, and I'm not saying if, because injuries are always a part of hockey. When injuries hit, we know that they're going to have either to juggle some players on LTIR, put some players on waivers and hope they pass through. It is going to be tricky for them to bring in, even call up a new player from Bridgeport if they don't find a way to free up a little more cap space. So they have $900,000 in cap space. Simon Holmstrom has a qualifying offer of $874,125. That would leave them with less than $26,000 in cap space. And by the way, the deadline, to sign those qualifying offers was Monday at 5 o'clock Eastern time. Now, as of this recording, the Islanders have not said anything either way about whether or not Simon Holmstrom has signed the deal, hasn't signed the deal. That remains to be seen. But one other way, we've talked about direct trades. Which team might want Anders Lee or J.G. Pageau and what have you? But there's another way for the New York Islanders to free up cap space. And it may not be the most obvious or the most likely, because I kind of question whether or not Lou Lamoriello would go this route, because it requires a little creativity. But you could do a three-way trade and you get two other teams involved. One team takes on cap space and probably receives a player or a pick to take on that cap space. And then the other two teams would trade players or picks or whatever it is that they want to do. And there are teams out there that have the cap space and can take it on. Whether or not they'll do it or not, again, sort of remains a question. But, would the Islanders be willing to deal with teams like the Columbus Blue Jackets, a division rival, who right now has more than $14.5 million in cap space? The Calgary Flames with more than almost $21 million in cap space. And, these two, the Flames, for example, are in a good situation in the sense that they are beginning a rebuild. And if they're beginning a rebuild, they may be willing to take on a veteran player or just some cap space to try to, if they get an extra third round pick, and I'm just making up a round, that's incentive for them to expedite their rebuild and get things going. Detroit has almost $20 million in cap space, but they, I think, are more trying to make the playoffs this year. But again, cap space, maybe not losing a player, maybe just gaining a draft pick for retaining cap space. That is, something that an option opens up with a three-way trade. Now, the two other teams that I think really could be interested in trades, and these teams might be more interested in a direct trade than a three-way trade, but a three-way trade also becomes possible. You got the San Jose Sharks, and then their Southern California cousins, the Anaheim Ducks. Ducks have more than $22 million in cap space. The Sharks, not quite that much, but also a lot of cap space. They are now, over the cap floor. And, teams like the Ducks and teams like the Sharks, they are teams that can use either a veteran presence like a J.G. Pageau or an Anders Lee, who could help them to mentor some of their young prospects. That's always a possibility. Or they may be just willing to take on some cap space and be part of a three-team deal that just allows the Islanders and maybe the other team they're trading with a little more flexibility as to how much cap space is involved, what players can be included in the deal. Look, if you've got a guy with a $5 million cap hit that the Islanders are interested in acquiring, and Anaheim, and I'm, again, just giving an example, is willing to take on, half of that, then the Islanders only have to free up $2.5 million in cap space to make that trade work. Oh, by the way, that's how much Casey Cizikas' salary is. Again, only using an example. So you can get a player who's getting paid $5 million, but only costs you $2.5 million by doing that. The downside to that approach, however, is that you're, again, giving away a draft pick, most likely, or a prospect or somebody with the hope that, you're getting something that'll help you win now. If you believe the core of this team isn't going to be good enough, even with the addition of a new player or two, to really contend, and it needs to be torn down to be built back up again, this is not the move for you. But if you want to bring in some more talent in the win now mode, that is one way to do it. And oh, by the way, Lou Lamoriello is kind of always in win now mode. All right, we've got a lot more to talk about on today's show. The Islanders have signed one of their draft picks to an entry-level contract. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what may be the strangest game in New York Islanders history. It's a game that involves another NHL team, the Stanley Cup playoffs, Bugs Bunny, and Led Zeppelin. Let's see if you can figure out anything about that game. And for our Islanders birthday of the day, an Islanders goalie from the mid-'90s who hung in there during some pretty tough times on Long Island. We've got all that and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with quality candidates faster. And listeners of Locked On Islanders will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about it, Indeed, on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Islanders made a signing today. Some good news. Second-round pick, Jesse Pulkkinen, the big defenseman. He ends up signing with the New York Islanders, a 3-year entry-level deal. Pulkkinen, 19 years old. He'll turn 20 in December. A native of Finland, 6'6", 203 pounds. Was not drafted a year ago in 2023, but was drafted by the Islanders this year. Played both in a junior league briefly and then in an adult league in Finland last year. Had 2 goals, 8 points in 29 games playing with adults in Finland. And look, he is a guy who I think has the potential down the road to be an impact player, maybe even a middle, pair defenseman. His offensive game is not great, but he has real confidence when he's playing in the defensive zone. He knows how to block shots. He has a long reach. Reminds a couple of scouts of Adam Pelech, of all people, with that reach and the way he basically can knock the puck off the stick of an offensive player. Now, he still needs to work on his passing and his offense. probably, again, still a few years away from the National Hockey League. But at the same time, you got to think that signing him is definitely a step forward for the New York Islanders and something that this team really needed to do. And we'll see how long it takes him to get to the NHL. Now, Puckpedia says he will earn $775,000 in the first 2 years. So that's the league minimum with this entry-level contract. So this year and next year. In year 3, his NHL salary would go up to $800,000, and he does get a signing bonus of $97,500, and there is a games played bonus of $102,500. He would be a restricted free agent after the 2026-2027 season, and the AAV, the average cap hit for his deal, is $881,000. So here is a promising defenseman, and he's not as young as some of the other players, in the draft, because he was sort of passed over last year. And to now have him available, to the organization, having signed his entry-level deal, the Islanders are quietly building up a group of defensemen who I think can really eventually make an impact. You've got Pulkkinen. You got Isaiah George. He's 20 at this point. Callie Odelius, 20. Those 3 guys are out there with this team now. And, who knows, in 3 years, maybe all 3 of them, but at least 1 or 2 should be on the Islanders roster. And again, this is something that Islander fans are certainly aware of, because we've been talking about it every day. We've been talking about this frequently on the show. The Islanders need to do a better job of developing their picks and getting them ready for the NHL. I don't want to see more Islanders picks get either brought up too quickly, which happened to guys like Josh Bailey, for example, or Nino Niederreiter, or they get brought up and don't get a chance. Whether you talk about Oliver Wahlstrom or Ruslan Ishkakov, guys who, or maybe even Samuel Bolduc, who may very well be facing a similar situation if he doesn't start cracking the lineup. They're too good for the AHL, nothing to prove there. They're not good enough for the NHL, or they're not given enough of a chance to succeed in the NHL, and you end up with a guy who is stuck in no man's land as far as his development is concerned, and you don't want to see that happen. So hopefully the Islanders start to improve the way they develop their prospects, because it is very important for this franchise to be able to do that. Why? Well, let's face it. We know in the history of the Islanders, they have never signed an elite big ticket free agent in his prime. They have, look, Anthony Duclair this year, great signing, very happy with it. But is Duclair, a top 10 free agent in this market? No. It's never happened, whether it's because of the market, the taxes in New York, the facial hair rule that Lou Lamoriello has. In the past, the excuse was always, oh yeah, the Nassau Coliseum, old building, nobody wants to play there, the facilities aren't good enough. Whatever the excuses used to be, they still haven't been able to do it. And that makes draft and develop, as well as trade, vital to the success of this franchise. And Lou Lamoriello has made some good trades. Some bad ones, but some good trades. Getting Bo Horvat, getting Alexander Romanov, getting Kyle Palmieri. These have been useful players who have helped the New York Islanders. You could argue about the cost, but these have been useful players that he's acquired for the New York Islanders. But the draft and develop thing and the free agency thing both need improvement, and we'll see whether or not that can happen going forward. All right, we have a lot more to get to on today's show. We're going to talk about what may very well be the strangest game in Islanders history. We're going to talk about that. We'll have our Islanders birthday of the day. All that and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So I wanted to talk about what may very well be the strangest game in New York Islanders history and one of the strangest games in NHL history. It is, by the way, the only game, to my knowledge, in the history of the Islanders where they played a game at the Nassau Coliseum, a playoff game no less, but the Islanders were the road team. They wore what were then their blue road jerseys. The other team, in this case the Chicago Blackhawks, had the final change when matching lines and were designated as the home team wearing their home whites. Here's what happened. The date was April 7th, 1977, and the Islanders faced the Chicago Blackhawks in the old preliminary round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, which was a best 2 out of 3. And back then, the first place team in every division had a bye, and then the next 8 teams would face off, and then the 4 winners would advance against the 4 division winners for the quarterfinal round. Well, basically, the Chicago Blackhawks that year did not expect to be in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So what ends up happening, the people who ran Chicago Stadium booked a Led Zeppelin concert for the 3 days around the scheduled home game for the Blackhawks in this best of 3 series. So the Islanders were home for game 1, and if necessary, game 3, the Blackhawks for game 2. So Led Zeppelin is playing at Chicago Stadium. The Chicago Bulls had games scheduled on the 2 days that the concert was not taking place. And so the Blackhawks made a proposal. The proposal was, hey, let's play the game at a neutral site. Bill Torrey, the Hall of Fame general manager of the Islanders back then, he knew the NHL rulebook. And the rulebook said that any game that could decide a playoff series could not be played at a neutral site. So the Islanders made the arrangement that they would be the home team and they would rather be the road team, but game 2 of this series would be played at the Nassau Coliseum. Now, the Islanders won game 1, 5-2. Game 2, you had Tony Esposito, the Hall of Fame goalie of the Blackhawks, going up against Billy Smith, the Hall of Fame goalie of the New York Islanders. And again, Islanders in their then road blues, the Blackhawks in their home whites. Blackhawks had the last change. Now, it wasn't even that simple because the Islanders also had to kick out a scheduled event at the Nassau Coliseum. And that was a children's performance involving Bugs Bunny live at the Nassau Coliseum. Well, Bugs Bunny got postponed. Led Zeppelin won the day, and the game was played at the Coliseum. after all was said and done. The Blackhawks ended up scoring the first goal. Dennis Hull got it from Bob Murray and Stan Mikita midway through the first period, but the Islanders answered. Jude Drouin scored his first of the playoffs. Ed Westfall had one assist. Dave Salvian had the other. And Dave Salvian, this was his only career NHL game, either regular season or playoff. And he ended up with an assist on what was then the tying goal. In the second period, Clark Gillies scored. Billy Harris had the assist, and that was all she wrote. The Islanders beat the Blackhawks 2-1, eliminated Chicago from the playoffs, and managed to win a road game, the only road game they ever played at the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Islanders outshot the Blackhawks 35-19. Tony Esposito, outstanding in goal for Chicago, but the Islanders end up carrying the day. They were the much better team, and they would advance to the quarterfinal round where they would face the Buffalo Sabres and sweep them in 4 games. And after that, the Islanders would go on to face the Canadiens in the semifinals, and Montreal would eliminate them on their way to their second of 4 straight Stanley Cups. But what a strange occurrence this game was. And the New York Islanders played on the road thanks to a conflict with Led Zeppelin, Bugs Bunny, and Bill Torrey, who really knew the NHL rule book. And you can hear the audio of this game, I believe, on YouTube, so you could check that out if you want. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. And, well, we are basically a day early, but Wednesday will be the 55th birthday of former Islanders goalie Tommy Soderstrom, the Swedish native drafted by the Flyers in the 11th round back in 1990, came over to North America in 1992, played for the Flyers for 2 years, and then joined the Isles in 94-95, which was a lockout-shortened year, was the Islanders starter in 94-95, 95-96, only played 1 game in 96-97, and then headed back to Sweden to finish his hockey career. In 156 career NHL games, Soderstrom had a .363 goals against average and an .884 save percentage. Those Islander teams that he played on were not the best. They struggled. This is prime fisherman jersey time. And one of his better games as an Islander, how about January 11th, 1996? Islanders in the fisherman jerseys hosting the Maple Leafs at the Coliseum. Damian Rhodes gets the start for the Leafs. Obviously, Tommy Soderstrom in goal for the Islanders. And the Islanders jumped out to a 3-0 lead, a shorthanded goal by Dan Plant. Matthew Schneider scoring on the power play. Nicholas Anderson scoring at even strength. They led 3-0 after 1, but it took a second period goal by Ziggy Palffy to be the game winner. The Islanders gave up 3 goals, 2 in the second, 1 in the third, but because of some outstanding goaltending by Tommy Soderstrom, they were able to win this game by a score of 4-3, despite being outshot 46-23 in this game. So Soderstrom with 43 saves and a .935 save percentage to earn the W. And if you were the goalie for the Islanders in 1995-96, some of your wins were going to come in games like that as well, where the Islanders were outplayed, but your goalie, in this case, Tommy Soderstrom, stood on his head. So a very happy birthday, a day early, to Tommy Soderstrom. He is our Islanders birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Everydayers, we will be back tomorrow on the show with the latest Islanders news, notes, and happenings, any new signings, any new rumors, we'll hopefully have a decision on whether or not Simon Holmstrom signed his qualifying offer. We'll fill you in on all the details of that. So make sure you join us for that. Until then, keep cool, everybody. It's hot out there here on Long Island. Have a great day. And of course, let's go Islanders.